I invite you to turn in your Bible to the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 is where we'll begin the lesson this morning. I'm very glad to be back. And I get back and everybody else leaves. I'm trying not to take that personal. No, I'm teasing about that, but I'm glad you're here. We miss a lot of folks and trust that they'll have a very profitable time and a safe time, Lord willing, this week coming up. But I'm very glad to be with you and appreciate the opportunity to visit with the church at El Bethel last week, and very happy to be home. We were singing about the solid rock and what you can hang on to in life. Well, we need that, don't we? Because this world will beat on you. I'm sure that's not news to you. I don't care who you are in this audience. And the older you get, the more beating you take. We have a lot of concern and care for young people here. We have some young folks, good young people. And that's a lot of what some of the efforts that are planned for this week are about. Parents who are trying to find some good opportunities for their young people. I'm not saying it's necessary. I'm just saying that's the spirit behind it. And in our teaching here, in our Bible classes, we spend a good bit of time trying to encourage young people. And I'm not opposed to that at all. But everybody's soul is important. And not just those who are younger, but those who are not younger. We all have our challenges and difficulties. And Ecclesiastes 12 is a great reminder of that fact. I've got the old King James up on the board here. It might be a little small in print. If you're reading along in your Bible, that's fine, but I'm trying to have that common translation for us. But Ecclesiastes chapter 12 begins with the very famous words, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun, or the light, or the moon, or the stars be not darkened, or the clouds return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out of the windows be darkened. And the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low. And he shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low. Also, when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fear shall be in the way. And the almond tree shall flourish, and the grasshopper shall be a burden, and desire shall fail, because man goeth to his long home. And the mourners go about the streets, wherever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. All is vanity. It's quite a description. It's obviously given in symbolic language, but what it describes is familiar to us. You don't have to be old to realize these things, but if we get older, we likely will live them. He talks about a time when the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened. The sources of light begin to dim. That's generally explained as being there comes a point in life, if you live long enough, you just don't think as quick as you used to. You know, the light's not quite as bright as it used to be. Now, there are exceptions to that. And all these things that he talks about here, there are exceptions. Roddy knows exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you guys do, too. When I moved here 100 years ago, I hadn't been here very long at all. In fact, I didn't even know the way to Miss Joyce's house. I had to have somebody help me. And there were no signs back then, thanks for that. and that we were starting a meeting. I wish I could remember who it was in the meeting. What I remember about that morning, we used to always go out to Miss Joyce's house, and I hope we still do, but Mr. Burt's house, and in the afternoon, we'd just go visit there between services. And there was a Brother Denham who was here from Pea Ridge. I'd never met him before. He drove by himself, and he wound up going down to Miss Joyce's house. I felt bad for him. He couldn't follow me. I didn't know myself at the time. I had to have somebody lead me around. He made it fine. He's 95 years old. 95. And I found out later a whole lot of things about Brother Denham. He was an extraordinary character. Judd and I went overseas a few years ago to Italy, and Brother Denham, he'd been out of his pocket helping support some preachers over there. He was an extraordinary fellow. And late in life, he had great strength and great presence of mind. So we understand that, and I know some young people who are affected badly, physically and otherwise. We're talking about average, we understand that. But if we live long enough, there may come a time we just don't think as quick as we used to. That can happen. He talks about the keepers of the house shall tremble. Most people interpret that symbol to be something to do with the hands or the arms, and we get the tremors. I've known people badly affected by that, and I've often thought how frustrating it must be to just be shaking uncontrollably. And you try to take medicine and that begins to make you tired. It's just a difficult thing. But it's not uncommon, and it can happen. And he talks about the strong men shall bow themselves. Most interpret that to have something to do with the legs that have kept you upright and strong, and now they become weaker. And we just don't have the strength in our legs anymore to be able to do what we used to do. And the grinders shall cease because they're few. Our teeth don't work like they used to. And you can imagine, in Solomon's day, he didn't have fluoride in the water. Couldn't go down to the dentist. It would have been an extraordinary thing if a fellow had very many teeth, I suppose, if he lived for very long. And how painful that would be. Brother Haley used to tell the story about someplace somewhere out in Texas, I think it was, and he said that they were asking some good folks there in the church. He said, "What are you thankful for?" And they began to give one thing and another. And one really older lady, they asked her, "What are you thankful for?" And she said, "Well, I got 2 teeth left, but thank the Lord they meet." She said, it's a hard thing, especially in ancient times. Affects a lot of things when your teeth don't work right or when you lose them. He talks about those that look out of the windows be darkened. Obviously enough, our eyesight is not what it used to be. I was talking to someone recently. How many people do you know that have had cataract surgery? Go in now, that just seems like such a streamlined thing. But that wasn't known about in Solomon's day or a long time after Solomon. And just the world became a very dull, fuzzy place. We're very blessed to have the advantages that we have. But all these things are things that can happen, and a lot of times have happened to people as they get older. It's always interesting to me that the contrast here. You rise up at the voice of a bird, which most interpret to be something along the lines of, we just, it doesn't take anything to wake us up. We wake up so quickly, and then you can't go back to sleep. And sleep becomes a problem for some people. But on the other hand, we can't hear thunder hardly. Why is that? How in the world can anything wake me up, but then you turn around and all the daughters of music shall be brought low? And how frustrating that is, by the way. If you have hearing loss or know those who have hearing loss, that is no fun. It's tough. And he talks about the almond tree flourishing. I didn't underline that for some reason. I don't know why. But the almond tree, supposedly, when it blooms white. So this is talking about a bunch of gray-headed old folks, if you ever met somebody like that. he says all of these are a part of the picture of the body running its course and life running its course. And the silver cord is loosed and the golden bowl is broken, and people have interpreted that to really be just the body itself, whether it be the brain and the spinal cord and all the rest of it, and it just degenerates and goes down until finally the dust returns to the earth. And we are, dying in that sense every minute physically. And there are things that go emotionally with those physical changes. Verse 5, when he talks about being afraid of what's high and fears being in the way, the physical limitations can tend to make us more timid. And we might find ourselves in such situations. We're not steady on our feet anymore, and so we don't like to get up on ladders like we used to. And you may reach a point, if you live long enough, that it's just easy to trip, and then a fall becomes a major issue. Fear shall be in the way. The grasshopper shall be a burden. People interpret that in different ways. But the most obvious one to me is just the fact that it doesn't take anything to be a burden. I made a grasshopper hop on me. It slowed me down, And so everything becomes burdensome and difficult as we go on. And again, that works on us spiritually even. Remember you're created in the days of your youth, because if you don't do it while you're young, he says, the evil days shall come. Evil doesn't necessarily mean moral evil. It just means difficult, hard days will come when you shall say, I have no pleasure in them. Have you ever heard somebody who had the attitude, maybe we've had it ourselves at some point as a young person, I know there are things I ought to do, and when I get old, I'm going to get straight. When I get older, I'm going to correct my life, and I'm going to get serious about God. Right now, I got a lot of things I'm doing that just don't let me serve God. But I'll serve God one of these days. Well, you think you will, and some may. What Solomon said is that you don't really get more and more apt to change as you get older. You get less apt to change. And the older you get, the more set you get in your ways, and the more difficult it is to make major changes. That's why you need to serve God when you hear his voice, because if you wait till later, there'll be all kinds of reasons why you won't answer the call like you think you will if you have the opportunity to get old, which is an assumption itself. Verse 2 is one of the most memorable of all these great descriptions. He talks about old age being a time when the clouds return after the rain. I think I read that several times before it really hit me what he was saying there. But if it rains, we figure, well, pretty soon the rain will pass and it'll get sunny again. And that sort of describes life in some ways. We get sick, we expect to get better. We go down, we expect to come up. But what happens when you reach a point in life when what comes after the rain is more rain? And the clouds return, and return quickly. What happens when you go to the doctor and you say, this hurts, and instead of saying, well, here's what you do to fix it, he says, well, yeah, it's going to hurt. And it's going to hurt tomorrow, and if you live 10 years, it's going to hurt again. That can happen to young people. But it certainly gets more and more the answer as we get older. And so now your choice is you can either hurt or take a pill that knocks you out, makes you groggy all day. And then life becomes just a matter of pain management. And we're not going to get fixed and get well. We've got to figure out just how to deal with it. All those are the things he's talking about here. The clouds return after the rain. The doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low. I think he's already spoken in this section about the loss of hearing. I don't think that's just what he's talking about here. It's included. But he talks about what happens when the sound of the grinding is low is the doors are shut in the streets, which I understand to mean that as we are physically more limited and more removed from what's going on, we tend to be more isolated and feel less a part of things, maybe we could say. And a lot of older people, that's the way they feel about things. They can't hear the way they used to. They can't go like they used to go, and they tend to feel more and more isolated. And some of that can be remedied, and some of it's just the nature of things. The older you live, if you live as long as a brother like Brother Denham, and thank God for his long, good life, but I'll tell you one thing, if you get to be 96, you're not going to have many folks at your high school reunion if you go, if that's important to you, or whatever it might be. And you outlive a lot of your friends. You outlive your kids sometimes. And that's a price you pay for that long life. And so, more isolation that comes from those kinds of things. And he says, desire shall fail. But some of that it's not all bad. It's unpleasant. But here's the fact that you and I know. We weren't made to live here forever. And if you live to be 97 or 104 or 124, the truth is that we're not made to live here forever. And the longer we live, in a way, the more life teaches us that, or reminds us of that we're looking for something beyond. So problems and limitations and pain is not the whole story. And there are a lot of great examples in the Bible. We're not going to go through them all, but there are certainly several great examples in the Bible of older people who were so powerful in their service to God. For example, we think about Moses and studying in the adult class this period of time. So this will be very familiar to us. In Deuteronomy 34, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab. Just as the Lord had said, he was buried in the valley opposite Beth Peor in the land of Moab. No one knows to this day where his burial place is. And Moses was 120 years old when he died, and his eyesight was not impaired. He was still vigorous and strong. He was quite an exception to the rule of physical decline. But what's most important about Moses was not just that he was physically strong, it's that every single day that God gave him, he used in God's service. And the great thing that can be said about you, we got folks here today that are well past their 65th birthday. And whatever time that God has given them, they are as engaged in the service of God today as they were 30 years ago. And that's exactly how it ought to be. Glory to God for it. So old age is not doom and gloom, and isn't it sad? Old age can be a glorious thing if you got somebody like Moses who's got his priorities straight and is determined, if God gives me today, God's going to get it back in service to him. Or I think about a man like Caleb. It's an interesting thing, and I'm sure you've probably noticed this before, but it took me a time or two to catch on to this. Back in Numbers chapter 14, again, in our adult class, this will be very familiar territory. But in Numbers 14, there's that story about the failure at Kadesh Barnea when the children of Israel were just poised on the sort of the edge of Canaan, southern edge of Canaan, and were looking to go over to the land, and they sent the spies over there. God told them to send the spies over there. And they came back with a report, an evil report, that this is 1332, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eats up the inhabitants thereof. I take that to be, it's a land that is given to war and conflict. And therefore, the people there, they're ready for conflict. Let me tell you, you march up there with soldiers, they're not going to run off. They are used to that. And he said, I tell you, there are people there, taller folks than I've ever seen. There are giants there. The Nephilim, the sons of Anak. We look like grasshoppers to them. We look like grasshoppers to us. It just won't work. And of course, Israel, as soon as they heard any negative word, they just surrendered and caved into it. And they said, well, we just ought to go back to Egypt. God's brought us out here to kill us. It's terrible. It's awful. And Joshua and Caleb spoke up. And in 14 and verse 8, they said, if the Lord delight in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Don't dare rebel against God. Don't quit now. Don't fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them. The Lord is with us. Fear them not. And of course, they're going to stone them to death. And then God intervened, and he cursed that generation. And 40 years went by while that generation died off. And then you come over to Joshua chapter 14. And Caleb, the man of Judah that stood up for God and tried to call the people back to God, Caleb was allowed to enter the land of Canaan. He's still there. And in Joshua 14, we find when the time came to divide up the land that Caleb said, Moses said, this is mine. The portion that I spied out is mine. Verse 6 reads, then the children of Judah came unto Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said unto him, thou knowest the thing that the Lord said unto Moses, the man of God, concerning me and thee in the Kadesh Barnea. 40 years old was I when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to espy out the land. And I brought him word again, as it was in mine heart. Nevertheless, my brethren that went up with me made the heart of the people melt. But I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses sware on that day, saying, surely the land wherein my feet have trodden shall be thine inheritance, and thy children's inheritance forever, because thou hast wholly followed the Lord my God. And now behold, the Lord hath kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, even since the Lord spake this word unto Moses, while the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness. And lo, I am this day 85 years old. And yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so my strength now for war, to go out and to come in. Now therefore give me this mountain wherewith God spake to me that day. For thou hearest in that day how the Anakim were there, and the cities were great and fenced. If so be the Lord will be with me, then I will be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. And Joshua blessed him and gave him Hebron for his inheritance. Now here's the point. 45 years before, Caleb said, do not quit now. Don't lose heart now. I don't care how tall the walls are, or how tall the people are. We can win. We can't lose with God. 45 years later, same walls, same giants. We can do it now. The greatness of Caleb is not just that he had the courage at Kadesh Barnea. He had the courage in Canaan 45 years later as an older man. We don't have to get weak in spirit. Even if our body gets weak. Caleb, a pretty strong fellow, even as an old man. But the main thing, his strength was in his spirit. We mentioned Naomi as well. We remember that story in Ruth. This great woman suffered great tragedy. She lost her husband. She lost 2 sons. She got chased out of her homeland and spent years away in Moab. And after all of that loss, she felt she was bitter. But God worked in her life, and at the end of her life, she was considered the most blessed of women. and actually an ancestor of King David, because she did not allow her spirit, though she was greatly damaged, to be crushed. Another fellow I want to mention to you right quick, you may remember from the Old Testament history, 2 Samuel chapter 19 is where this story is found. There's a guy named Barzillai. The setting here is David had been chased out of Jerusalem, and he likewise had to flee from Absalom, his own son. It was a shameful, terrible time. And David found out during those days who his friends were. And one of his friends was this man Barzillai. And then when the battle was won and Absalom was killed, David was going back over Jordan, and he remembered his friend Barzillai. And he called to him and he said, "Look, I'd like you to go with me, and I'm going to repay you for your great service to the king." And so you have in the 19th chapter this little note here. Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim and went across the Jordan with the king to escort him across the Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. And he had provided the king with supplies while he stayed at Mahanaim. He was a very rich man. And the king said to Barzillai, he said, "Come across with me, and I'll provide for you while you're with me in Jerusalem." And Barzillai said to the king, he said, "How long do I have to live that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? Today I'm 80 years old. And can I discern between the good and the bad? Can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any longer the voice of singing men and singing women?" Let me pause to say, sounds a lot like Ecclesiastes 12, doesn't it? I don't think Barzillai was a what's a good word to use? A jaded individual or somebody who was bitter. I don't think that's his point at all. But what he is saying is what we come to realize. There's just an awful lot of things that appeal to young people that are not bad in of themselves, maybe good things. But they just don't appeal to me anymore. I've just reached that stage in life. I'm not interested anymore in the kind of things that thrill a young person. I moved out of that phase. I'm in another phase in his life. He said, "I tell you, I'll go with you a little ways over out of respect, but I'm not going to Jerusalem, and I'm not going to stay there. Let me return back that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. Here's my servant. If you want to reward somebody, reward him. And do that in my name, but not for me." But here's my point, that even though Barzillai was at that point in his life, I'll tell you one thing that he was as firm as ever on, and that is that when the work of God was in trouble, and when the king of God, the appointed king, was threatened, Barzillai didn't sit back and say, "Well, I'm going to let somebody else handle it. That's my job. I don't need your reward. I don't need the fine food of the king. I don't need his rewards. But I tell you, I want to do what's right because I can and because I care." That's the greatness of this man. I wanted to, in the connection with this lesson, also look at that familiar passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, because I think there's a principle here that will help me also. And maybe it reminds us of the spirit of a man like Barzillai. The Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians, and he says, "Having the same spirit of faith, according as it is written," and he quotes here from the Psalms, "I believed and therefore I have spoken." He said, that's us. We believe and therefore we speak. I think he may be answering this question. Somebody might say, "Paul, what is it that keeps you going? Why do you continue to serve God and to suffer over and over again?" His answer is, look at what the psalmist said, "I believe. That's why I speak, because I believe. Because what else could I do?" Barzillai, why would you get involved in this civil war between David and Absalom? You're an old fellow and there's nothing but risk here for you. He said, "Because I believe." Why do older people continue to serve God even though they're in late stages in their life, because they believe. All things are for your sakes, he says, that the abundant grace might, through the thanksgiving of many, redound to the glory of God. Our life is about glorifying God in every way we can. And so, he says, we faint not. Our outward man perishes. That's Ecclesiastes 12, isn't it? Our reflexes are not getting quicker. Our mind is not getting sharper. Our vision is not getting better. Our outward man perishes, but our inward man is renewed day by day by day by day. We don't consider our affliction to be heavy. We consider it to be light when we weigh it against the eternal weight of glory. We look not at the things that are seen, but at the things which are not seen. That's not a nonsense sentence. It seems like a paradox. But what he's saying is that when I wake up in the morning, I see things that are not physical. They're not things you can touch. I don't consider myself to be rich or poor just based on what I got in the bank. The true riches involve what relationship you're in with God. And hope involves being ready for a judgment I've not seen, but I know to be coming. The things which are seen are temporal. The things which are not seen are eternal. And so it's with that in mind that we recognize the fact, surely the outward man is perishing. There's no question about that. But our inward man must be renewed, must be nurtured. How can we do that? Let me, as we close this morning, offer this thought. That as I get older, I need more and more to pray. Prayer is not the purview of any one time in life. Young people need to pray. But so older people need to pray and meditate on the Word of God. Let me say this kindly. If you spend your time watching the television news, it will not help you spiritually. It will make you nuts. Those folks, I don't care who they are, they're all in it to scare people. So you'll be sure to tune back in this afternoon and tomorrow and the next day. There's a value in being informed, a limited value in that. But you see people, older people, who feed on that. And it doesn't take their mind to good places. But if we spend our time in talking to God and listening to God, then we can fulfill the same place that Paul did when he said, my inward man is renewed day by day. We find ways to serve other people. It is more blessed to give than to receive. And when you look in a place like Titus chapter 1, when Paul there writes to Titus and he said, look, you need to get things straight at Crete. You teach not just the young men and the young women, but the older men and the older women to think of their example, to find ways to help influence other people, especially young people, to encourage. Look for somebody that needs a friend, that's willing to listen. And see if you can show them what an older, godly person looks like. Because they need to see that. And I think about the fact that we always look beyond just the fact that my elbow hurts, or that I've got these physical troubles. But I think about things in a bigger context. Psalm 71 is such a great psalm. And David in that psalm, or the writer of the psalm, it may not have been David, I like to think it was David. David in that psalm asked God that he would bless him in this way. O Lord, or O God, thou hast taught me from my youth, and hitherto have I declared thy wondrous works. And now also when I am old and gray-headed, O God, forget me not until I have showed thy strength unto this generation. and thy power to everyone that is to come. That's my job. Philippians chapter 3, I'm sorry, we put on the chart here, in which Paul, probably in his early 60s at this point, he's in jail for the cause of Christ again. But he's not there licking his wounds. And he's not there patting himself on the back for all the things that happened in the past that he's done that's good. He said, the thing that matters to me is that I might know him, verse 10, and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering. What I want more than anything else in this life is to be accepted, to die in faith so that my body will be raised unto life. Verse 13, I count not myself to have apprehended or conquered, taken hold of. But this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things that are before. I press on to the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. So here's the challenge from Paul for every one of us, and especially for those of us who get older. Every day we live, we're reaching forward to lay hold upon Christ and his promises. We're not satisfied with where we've been, and we're not going to be distracted from where we're going. One more passage in Colossians chapter 3 and in verse 4. That's where Paul calls upon us to remember who we are. If ye are risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sits at the right hand of God. And set your affection not on things above, not on things on the earth. For your life is hid with Christ in God. That expression is an interesting one, isn't it? What does he mean when he says your life is hidden with Christ in God? There are several answers, I guess, that people might offer. My understanding is he's saying that when you devote yourself to Christ, the world is not going to recognize you. But that's okay. They didn't recognize him either. It reminds me a little bit of what he said back over in Galatians, the last part of Galatians. One of the last things he said in that letter. He said, God forbid that I should glory save in the cross of Jesus Christ, by whom the world is crucified unto me. That's clear enough, isn't it? When you become Christ and you're going to serve him, you cut yourself off from the world. But guess what? I'm also, as he says there, crucified unto the world. The world's going to likewise not see you. They recognize you not. You're a stranger to them. They don't understand you. So back here in Colossians, you're dead and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall you appear also with him in glory. We want the recognition of Christ, and one day it'll be manifested who you are. And that'll be worth everything. We used to sing an old song. We don't sing it as much anymore, but I remember it from my earliest days of singing hymns. If I walk in the pathway of duty, and if I work till the close of the day, I shall see the great King in his beauty. When I've gone the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day, and I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way. However long God gives us on this earth, I hope and pray it's my attitude to use it all for his glory. Please get out your songbooks if you haven't already and turn to the number that Brother Rodney selected. If it be your desire this morning to begin your journey in becoming a child of God, being baptized into Christ, we'd be glad to assist you there as one who, as a child of God, if you have strayed from the Lord, return to him. And we'd likewise be glad to help you in any way that we can. We sing a song to encourage you. Let us know how we can help while we stand, while we sing.